Hello, Goat Format Duelist. I got a fun reaction video today. I did one of these before and people seemed to like it, so I was requested to do another one. So today I'm going to be reacting to a good old classic, but perhaps controversial video that I made in the past. It was the top 8 Goat Format deck building mistakes that you're still making. So basically I'm just going to go over all these cards that I said you either should be playing, shouldn't be playing, whatever, and look back and go, do I think what I said was correct? Or do I think maybe I was a bit misinformed on some cards? So let's go ahead and watch here. Let's jump right into it, guys. Number 8, we've got not playing Blowback Dragon and Reasoning Gate decks. Now, quick aside here, for all of these tips, I'm not saying that these are mistakes 100% of the time. I'm just saying that they are usually mistakes in the most commonly played builds of the decks that I'm going to talk about. So let me explain why I think in the standard build of Reasoning Gate you should play Blowback Dragon. I kind of think of Blowback Dragon as almost being like a Dark Sacred Crane. So my number 8 here was not playing Blowback Dragon and Reasoning Gate decks. Really what I meant at the time was there is a particular ratio that Reasoning Gate decks played when this video was made. And by the way, this video was made about 2 years ago. But you saw a lot of Reasoning Gate decks playing 2 Air Knights as sort of a light monster to go along with their Sacred Crane. And although I phrased this as, hey, you should play Blowback, really what I meant was that I thought Air Knight was really overrated and that Blowback was overall better than Air Knight. So what I said was, hey, instead of playing 2 Air Knights and no Blowback, you should probably play 1 and 1. So I recommended this lineup here as far as like your reasoning targets, because unless your opponent's playing Burn, they're not really going to call level 6 on reasoning very much. And so in other words, if you're reasoning and Blowback flips over, you're probably going to be able to summon it. And then the thing that I was alluding to with regards to it being more like Sacred Crane than Air Knight was the fact that Blowback, obviously you have priority when it's summoned, so you could just use Blowback's effect right away when it's summoned, like Sacred Crane. And obviously the cool thing is, like, if you summon your Blowback, use its effect, monster gate it, banish it, dimension fusion it, you can use the effect multiple times in one turn. Whereas Air Knight, you're only getting that effect after you've already attacked. And having the extra card, yeah, it's nice, but Reasoning Gate decks are best at just killing people, not trying to play the card advantage game. And Blowback does that better than Air Knight. So overall, I would say this advice aged pretty well, actually. Reasoning Gate isn't as popular today as it was at the time that I made this video, but you definitely still see some Reasoning Gate decks doing well. And yeah, I don't really see a lot of Reasoning Gate decks today that are playing Air Knight but not Blowback. Usually the decks are playing just Blowback, like 1 and 1, the way that I have here, Blowback and Air Knight. Or they might not play either entirely. There are some lists that just don't play either. They just go like Jinzo, 2 Sacred Cranes, and a Demock or something. A little more greedy, but you do still see those. Overall, like the part where I was saying, I mean, believe it or not, like even 2 years ago, I think Air Knight was still a pretty overrated card. Nowadays, like, you just barely see it played at all. So, yeah, I'd give myself like a B on this one. I think I should have like phrased it a little better. I think I should have talked a little more about why Air Knight is bad rather than trying to frame it as like, oh, you have to play Blowback. So I'd give myself a B on this one. Overall, I had the right idea. Number 7, we've got playing Mystic Tomato and Dark Mimic level 1 without any copies of Dark Mimic level 3. Now, the reason why this is only number 7 on my list is because this isn't a mistake that I see a ton, but when I do see it, it's a pretty big mistake. And as someone who helped popularize this strategy, hopefully I can help explain why. The obvious combo is that, if Mystic Tomato is destroyed by battle, you can special summon Mimic level 1. In your standby phase, level up to level 3, and this thins your deck by 2 cards, and then if your opponent has a monster in play, which they probably do, you can crash your Mimic level 3 into their guy and draw 2 cards, which is pretty strong, although not necessarily something that comes up a lot. But the main reason that I like to play Mimic level 1 and Mimic level 3 in the same deck, especially in a Chaos deck, And I have talked about this before on my previous videos, but I think sometimes people forget, is that Mind Control is one of the most commonly cited cards against your typical Thunder Dragon Chaos deck. So yeah, took a little while to get to the point there, but yeah, I mean, I agree with what I said still. Although I think this is not very relevant anymore, because you don't see a lot of Chaos decks running really Tomato and Mimics at all. Tomato is really just a much worse card than it used to be, because people have gotten better at playing against it. Like, people just don't... If you have a face-up Tomato, people just don't attack it. They just literally won't attack it. So yeah, if you were playing like some sort of Chaos deck, I probably wouldn't go with this package, but I mean, I would say that the advice still applies though. Like, I wouldn't play Tomato in level 1 without Mimic level 3. Mind Control, I mean, it kind of fades in and out of popularity, but as of now, I mean, Mind Control is still a pretty popular card. So, the level 3 offering you protection against Mind Control, and obviously level 3 being able to be searched by Mystic Tomato, I think that's pretty good, personally, but, yeah, sometimes you don't really see a whole lot of Chaos decks playing this at all. So, again, I'd give myself like a B. I mean, I think it was good advice. I just don't think it was super relevant necessarily. Like, I don't think it's useful in today's meta. Like, it's correct, but not correct in a helpful way. Oh, this is a good one. Now, for number 6, we've got not side decking Kuriboh, and this is particularly in decks that play both Chaos Sorcerer and Metamorphosis. Now, when it comes to how I side deck, I like to side cards that are very high impact, and Kuriboh does fit the bill in my opinion, and I'll explain why. Now, Kuriboh, while it is good against some more off-meta decks like Rescue Cat or Cyberstein, this is mostly against Reasoning Gate, which, as I am making this, Reasoning Gate is the most popular combo deck in GOAT format. Now, why do I like Kuriboh against Reasoning Gate? Now, it's not necessarily that I think Kuriboh is unbeatable, but it is extremely difficult for the Reasoning Gate player to play around. And Kuriboh is very similar to Threatening Roar, in principle at least, but it does have some huge differences. Now, in particular, the main issue with Threatening Roar is that it really only buys you one turn. Now, of course, yeah, so, again, taking a little while to get to the point. Yeah, I think my videos today are a little better than my older ones. But this one actually aged really well. Like, this was probably one of the more controversial ones. People gave me shit for this one in the comments. Like, a fair number of people were like, oh, Kuriboh's garbage. Like, why would you ever side this? And yeah, now we see, like, Kuriboh being cited quite a lot for basically the exact reasons that I talked about in this video. Didn't want to play the whole thing, but basically, and Reasoning Gate, still the most popular combo deck, although you just don't have a lot of combo these days. Threatening Roar, just, as someone who's played Reasoning Gate more than the average person, Threatening Roar isn't that good against Reasoning Gate. Like, it's just not. Like, the person activates True Nade, you chain Threatening Roar, and then they just go, okay, I'll go off next turn. Like, it's like I said in the video, it just buys you one turn. Whereas Kuriboh, it gets your opponent to actually commit resources to the board, and then you stop them from killing you. So in other words, if you're going to stop your opponent from killing you, you would prefer that they commit a lot of their firepower to the board so that you can survive a turn and then get rid of all their threats with whatever it is, right? You know, Tribe Infecting Virus, BLS, Snatch Steal, whatever it is. Whereas if they just go True Nade, you activate Roar, they won't commit their threats, and you haven't necessarily accomplished a lot. So yeah, nowadays, you do see a lot of Chaos decks siding 1 to 2 Kuriboh. I said, you know, oh, in Chaos meta decks particular, because it's like, oh, it's a dark for Sork. It's also a dark for Metamorphosis. That was kind of like the best case scenario. If anything, I don't think I gave Kuriboh enough credit in this video. It could be a good side deck card in lots of different decks. Doesn't have to be just a deck that has Chaos and Metamorphosis. So I think this aged credibility, I'd give myself an A on this one. If you want to know why people are siding Kuriboh so much now, I'd recommend going back and watching the video. It was pretty good, pretty insightful. For number 5, we've got side decking Cipher Soldier, also known as Kinetic Soldier. And Like some of these other tips that I've given, I think players have started to pick up on this, and I think Kinetic Soldier might be on its way out of most side decks, but it was quite popular as a side deck card even less than a month ago. So I want to talk about why that I feel this is a mistake. Kinetic Soldier, of course, as we would expect, is good against warriors. The problem is that the average warrior deck has quite a few outs to this guy. Especially given how popular it was, it kind of demanded that the average warrior player be good at outing this card. And yeah, so this is another one that I think aged pretty well, actually. At the time that I made this video, Kinetic Soldier, it was a pretty popular side deck card, although, like I said, I kind of did see the writing on the wall a little, in the sense that I was like, yeah, some of the better players seem to be picking up on the fact that this card isn't that good. So on one hand, like, I like high impact cards on the side, and Kinetic Soldier potentially can be quite high impact, but in particular, in Chaos, it's like, it's not a light or a dark, so it's, I don't know, to me, it's just not a very great card to side against warriors. They had outs, like I alluded to. If it's in attack mode, they can run it over with Kaiku. If it's in defense mode, they can kill it with Ninja. So, yeah, I just never thought this card was that great, and pretty much ever since I made this video, you did see Kinetic Soldiers drop out of the side. And decks that play Giant Rat, it's still good, of course, because you can search it with Rat. But yeah, today, you don't really see it as a main or side anymore, unless we're talking about, again, like a deck that plays Giant Rat. So yeah, I would give myself, yeah, probably an A. I think I'd have to give myself an A. I hope I'm not being too easy on myself, but to me, this seems like a slam dunk. I said this card wasn't good, and that people would stop siding it, and people stop siding it because it's not that good. 4 is a little more controversial, and that is not playing Sangan in Warriors. Now, I want to talk about a pattern that I've seen in GOAT format with some of the so-called staples of the format. And this pattern is that I think people have this mentality that if one of these very powerful cards is not nearly as good in their deck as it is in the average deck, that they should just not play it. So there might be a card like Sangan that, of course, is a 9 out of 10 in a deck like Thunder Dragon Chaos, and they go, well, it's only an 8 out of 10 in my deck, so I'm not going to play it. But then, meanwhile, they're playing a 7 out of 10 card like Skilled Dark Magician, which would normally be a 5 out of 10 in a different deck. And that logic, of course, doesn't really make sense, right? So, it's funny, I actually think I made some good points, but I was also wrong. Like, the point that I made about, like, card evaluation and how, like, you shouldn't cut a staple from your deck just because it's not as good as it would be in the average deck, I think that's actually extremely insightful, and I think players still don't realize that. However, I don't think you should play Sangan in Warriors. So yeah, like, the points surrounding Sangan were good points, but I kind of reached the wrong conclusion. And the main reason why, actually, so I actually think if the meta was different, I think you could play Sangan in Warriors. The problem is that Sangan is not a very good card against Chaos, as it turns out. Kind of for the same reason I was talking about how, like, Mystic Tomato isn't, like, as good as it used to be. Like, Sangan's just not that great against Chaos, because if you're playing a Warrior deck, and you're, like, summoning Sangan and, like, trying to attack the Chaos player, one, they can block it with Dakochi, which is, obviously, in that sense, makes it worse than a card like Skilled Dark Magician. And they're just gonna wait until they can clean up their Sangan with, like, a Chaos Sorcerer, or they'll Wing Blast it or something. I don't know, just, like, in that particular matchup, Warriors versus Chaos, Sangan is not that good in the Warrior deck. However, I think in certain matchups, actually, like Warriors versus Goat Control, Sangan is really good because you get to poke them for 1,000, and Goat Control is kind of hard-pressed to deal with it. They have to commit something that they normally wouldn't have to. Like, if you're attacking the Goat Control player directly with, again, just as an example, you're attacking them with a Skilled Dark Magician, they can Sakuretsu Armor it, they could go meta into Thousand Eyes, they can do, like, all this stuff to deal with it. They can go Tribe Infecting Virus, whatever it may be. Whereas if you're poking them with the Sangan, all of a sudden those answers just aren't good answers to what you're doing. And given that like a popular side decking strategy versus warriors seems to be to bring in like a lot of Sakuretsu armors and widespread ruins, I think that like Sangan can be good versus that siding strategy. So I would revise this. If I had to go back, I would say that you should side Sangan and warriors. Now in this video, I said it was a mistake not to main deck it. That I think is wrong. I don't think you should main deck Sangan and warriors, but I do think you should side it because it's very good in the warrior versus goat control matchup. And I would argue it can also be okay in the warrior mirror, just because, again, it's kind of a lot of back and forth where you're sort of Sakuretsu armoring each other's guys. And Sangan is good in that kind of game. But if your opponent is kind of just setting Dekochis the whole game, Sangan isn't good in that game. If your opponent's dropping Chaos Sorcerers all game, Sangan isn't good in that game. So a lot of like card evaluation in GOAT format is based around what the matchups are and how you expect a game to play out. If a game plays out a certain way, a card might be great, but then if it plays out a different way, it might be terrible. So you got to think about like what the most likely scenarios are, what the most likely matchups are, and play a card based on that. So, I mean, I do think that Sangan is kind of underrated in Warriors. I do think I saw like a top Warrior deck list recently that was citing Sangan. I don't know who it was. I forget who it was. But I would agree with that. I would agree with that decision. And particularly versus GOAT control, because Kaiku isn't very good against GOAT control, and you want to side out your Kaiku but have another Dark to bring in, and I think Sangan fills that role perfectly. So I think it is a mistake not to side Sangan and Warriors, but I wouldn't main it. So, I mean, overall, I'd give this a D. Probably should have given this one some more thought. Again, it's like I had good points, but I reached the wrong conclusion. I'd give myself a D on that one. All right, folks, we're moving on to our top 3 GOAT format deck building mistakes. And number 3 is kind of similar to number 4 in the general reasoning, and that is not playing Torrential Tribute, particularly in control decks. Obviously, in a combo deck like Empty Jar, you're not going to play Torrential Tribute. We all know that. In Reasoning Gate, you could play it, but usually you don't. But in a control deck, you definitely need to play Torrential Tribute. Now, on one hand, I can kind of get the logic behind why some people don't want to play this card, and that is if you're trying to protect something like a set Dekochi or a set Magician of Faith, Torrential Tribute isn't great at doing that in particular. So yeah, I mean, here, overall, I think I had the right idea. Just because, yeah, Torrential Tribute is still a good card. I mean, it was then, it is now. And now you do see more Chaos decks playing Torrential. You do still see some Chaos decks that don't play it, but it's far less than it used to be. Like, at the time I made this video, I would say maybe half of Chaos decks were playing Torrential, and half weren't. Nowadays, I'd say it's more like 80%. And I even had some players tell me I was wrong about this. Like, at the time I made this video, some Chaos players were like, oh no, you're wrong. I've been winning and I haven't had Torrential in my deck. But then all those players are playing Torrential in their decks today. So, like, I don't know. What people don't realize about, like, Mirror and Torrential, it's Snatch Steal and, like, some of these other powerful cards that deal with threats. Like, yes, the logic always is, like, oh, if I don't play Torrential and my opponent never sees it, then, like, oh, they'll just have to play around it all game, right? Like, if we ever play a really long game and, say I have, like, 10 cards left in my deck, right? The entire game, my opponent will have to play around Torrential because I won't have used it. Whereas if I play Torrential in the early game, then, like, oh, in the late game, they don't have to play around it. That's true, but, like, to me, that's more of a thing that isn't really true in practice. Like, yeah, the theory sounds good, but in practice, like, what you have to realize is, I think some people assume that, like, oh, if someone's a good player, they'll always play around Torrential if it's not in my grave. That's just not true. Like, sometimes you have a really big play that's going to win you the game if your opponent doesn't have Torrential. So you just go for it, right? You do the math. You go, oh, what are the odds they have Torrential? 20%. Oh, that gives me an 80% chance to win the game. I'm going to go for my big play. That is how good players think now. Like, the top players are not super conservative. So, again, like, you want to have Torrential in that scenario. And there was, like, a number of years, not really so much anymore, but there's a number of years where, like, Warriors just kind of ran rampant through the GOAT format meta because the Chaos players just weren't playing Mirror and Torrential, and Warriors were just steamrolling them. Like, yes, you can beat Warriors if you don't have Torrential in your deck, but, you know, versus that kind of tough matchup, you need to give yourself every advantage. So, yeah, there's a reason that people play Torrential today. I mean, you know, again, I think some people might even be surprised about this, that there was a time when most Chaos players weren't playing Torrential. But yes, that time did exist, and I think it was a mistake. So let's move on. For number 2, we've got playing Upstart Goblin in a non-combo deck. Now, I often see this played in various forms of control, like Thunder Dragon Chaos. On occasion, I've even seen it played in beatdown decks. The other day, I actually played against a zombie deck that was playing Upstart Goblin. So yeah, this is probably what I'm going to get the most shit for, and, you know, for good reason. For good reason. So here's the thing. I think today, my opinion is, Upstart is better than I was giving it credit for back then. However, I think it's still overrated. So I think I was wrong in the sense that, remember, I'm calling these mistakes. I was saying that, hey, if you're playing Upstart Goblin in your deck, you're making a mistake. So that I think is wrong. I think you can play Upstart in your decks. I think it's fine. I don't think you have to play Upstart, though. Like, to me, it's, again, it's kind of an optional card. Depends on the matchup. Depends on how you see the games playing out. So it's complicated. I think at the time of this video, I sort of oversimplified this a bit. Obviously, Upstart has its pros and cons. The pro is, like, you sort of go through your deck a little faster. Cons are your opponent gains 1,000 life. Sometimes that 1,000 life is relevant. Sometimes it isn't. Those are just the facts. Like, you are going to have games that you lose because you gave your opponent 1,000 extra life. That is a fact. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't play Upstart Goblin. One of the things that I do like about Upstart Goblin now, and also Jargreed. At the time I made this video, Jargreed wasn't really super popular. It was like a card that, like, a few Chaos decks occasionally played. Maybe, you know, 20% of Chaos decks back then are playing Jargreed. Now it's like 90%. So a little different. But Upstart and Jargreed can be good for the same reasons in that they're good against Dust Shoot. Jar of Greed more so because you can set Jar of Greed and play around Dust Shoot while also not making yourself vulnerable to Heavy Storm. Upstart, though, like, if you get Dust Shooted turn 1 and one of the cards in your hand is an Upstart Goblin, well, now that's like one less card that your opponent knows about because you're obviously going to activate your Upstart. So instead of them Dust Shooting, you know, sending back one card and then knowing what your other 5 cards are, well, they're going to Dust Shoot, send back one card, and only know what 4 of your other cards are. That, I think, is noteworthy, and Dust Shoot is a little more popular today than it was at the time that I made this video. So, gonna cut myself a little slack. Overall, I think, you know, again, I think I oversimplified this a bit. I think I was letting my own personal preference kind of get in the way of objectivity to a large extent. However, I still, like, I don't think Upstart is a staple in Chaos. I think you can build Chaos decks without Upstart, and it's fine. Also, sort of a theme for thought, interesting thought experiment. And I'm curious, like, let me know in the comments what you think about this. What amount of life points would Upstart have to give your opponent for you to not play it in, say, a standard Chaos deck, right? Obviously, if it was draw a card and your opponent gains 5,000, no one would play it, right? No one would give your opponent 5,000 life in exchange for going through your deck a little faster. And then if, on the other hand, it said draw a card, your opponent gains 100 life, well, then everyone would play it. I mean, 100 life, that's basically nothing. At that point, it's just a free card. Why not play it? So, yeah, to me, it's like kind of interesting to think, like, what? Obviously, there is some amount of life points where going through your deck faster outweighs the advantage of giving your opponent life, right? Where it's sort of perfectly balanced. And obviously, we can't really know what that is. It's sort of a theoretical number, but I wonder what you think that number is. Like, if it was your opponent gains 2,000, would you still play Upstart? What if it was 1,500? Would you still play Upstart? What about 1,200? I don't know. And yeah, I did mention this in the video too. I do think playing Upstart is a mistake in Warriors or just any beatdown deck like Earth Aggro, that sort of thing. Luckily, you don't really see Warriors playing Upstart too much anymore. For a while, it seemed there was like a month where like half the Warrior decks are playing Upstart for some reason. Now, I'd say maybe 90% of Warrior decks are not playing Upstart. So, I mean, I think I was right about don't play Upstart in Warriors. I mean, I think I still want to give myself some credit for saying, again, I don't think it's like a straightforward staple that some people think it is. So yeah, I'd give myself a D on this one. Obviously, I was mostly wrong, but I think I raised some valid points. All right, guys, we're finally down to number 1. If you've followed my GOAT format content for a while, it shouldn't surprise you. Wing Blast versus Raigeki Break. Now, I could make a whole half-hour video about just this issue in particular, but I'm going to try to not get carried away. So, let's get into it. Most Thunder Dragon Chaos players are choosing to play Raigeki Break instead of Phoenix Wind Blast. Not all of them, but a pretty large majority. And I think this is a pretty huge mistake. Now, when I talk to most players who have actually tested both cards over a large sample, they will willingly admit, oh yeah, Wing Blast is definitely the better card the majority of the time. But when I talk to people who haven't tested Wing Blast, they will often cite very specific scenarios where Raigeki Break is better. And in some cases, they are correct. For example, against Snatch Steal, you'd rather have a Raigeki Break than a Wing Blast. But then they cite other cards like Break. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously I was right about this one. Well, maybe not obviously. There are some people that are still on the Raigeki Break train. At the time I made this video, I'd say maybe 80 to 90% of Chaos players were using Raigeki Break. Now it's kind of the other way around, where the overwhelming majority are now using Wing Blast, but you still see some using Raigeki Break. And I will say, fair disclosure, you definitely do see top Chaos deck lists still using Raigeki Break. It's still a thing. And, like, the thing is obviously one of these cards are better than the other, but whichever one it is, it's fairly close. Like, whether you're playing Raigeki Break or Wing Blast, it's a very tiny optimization. It's not going to make or break, like, your win rate, right? It's not like you're going to take a Chaos deck, take out Raigeki Break, and put in Wing Blast, and your win rate is going to skyrocket. Like, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. I will also say, I didn't distinguish between different Chaos lists because I think there are certain lists where you can make more of the case for Raigeki Break over Wing Blast. I even had the Ritual deck that I profiled on this channel before. That list had 2 Wing Blast, 2 Raigeki Break. And it kind of depended. In that deck, it seemed like results may vary. Also in, Chaos Control, as people call it, the decks with Chaos Sorcerer Metamorphosis, I think it was a pretty good argument that Raigeki Break is better in that deck. But again, it depends on the meta. Like, if you're playing Chaos Control and you expect a lot of people to come with Azura Priest, you're almost forced to play Raigeki Break because Wing Blast just doesn't deal with Azura. But if you think no one's going to play with Azura, then maybe you do play Wing Blast. Also, I don't think I talked about this in the video, but I actually think that if you're playing Wing Blast in Chaos, I think it should you should try your damned hardest to make it a 3 of. Because Wing Blast is much better in multiples. The turns where you just go, oh, Wing Blast your guy again, like attack you for a bunch of damage, it's very powerful. So now I'd say, like, the most common deck lists that I see for Chaos are playing 2 Wing Blast to 0 Raigeki Break. I'm not sure if I agree with that, to be quite honest. I would try to fit in that 3rd Wing Blast. That's just me, because I think Wing Blast gets a lot better in multiples. That being said, though, I mean, all the points that I made were right. God knows how many videos I've done on why you should play Wing Blast over Raigeki Break. It kind of became a meme. But, yeah, as I said in the video, I said, the people who've tested it pretty quickly realized that Wing Blast is better. And that was kind of what happens. Like, in the time that I made this video, more people tested Wing Blast, and more people realized it was good. So I think the moral of the story here is, I'm not trying to say, like, oh, you should listen to me. If I say a card is good, then that means you have to play it or you're stupid. No, because as we saw, like, there were some cards on this list where I was wrong about them, right? So I'm not saying always listen to me. Main moral of the story, though, is just test stuff. You got nothing to lose. Like, if someone says Wing Blast is better than Raigeki Break, give it a shot. Maybe someone will say, oh, you know what? I actually think Divine Wrath is better than both cards. Maybe it is. Give it a shot. Someone might say, could be anything, right? Oh, Legendary Jujutsu Master is really good. I mean, who knows? Try it out. See if it works. Whatever it is. Like, we have all these new tech cards throughout the years, whether it's Golem Sentry, Jar of Greed, Hysteric Fairy, all that stuff. The people who find these cards first are the people that are the most open-minded. So, let me know what you guys think. That's it, guys.